Thank you for that, rather long introduction. First of all, I'd like to say how delighted I am to be here, and I'd like to thank both the High Commissioner of Trinidad and Tobago for hosting us and for the Institute for inviting me. So thank you for that. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm obviously by background and by profession, I'm very involved in the tourism industry. But what I'd like to kind of focus on today is the relationship between tourism and obviously culture and what you might call public diplomacy or cultural diplomacy. And one of the things that I'd like to try to perhaps focus our minds around is advocating for a move really away from key performance indicators which drive the tourism industries around the world, which are all kind of predicated on growth and expansion. And I would like to suggest that we need a more holistic kind of approach to tourism, which looks at valuing sustainability, inclusion, and issues like cultural diplomacy. One of the things that I do, as well as working at the University of Surrey, is that I work to advise the Welsh Government on its policy strategy and policy development. And I know for a fact that the success or failure of organisations like Visit Wales, Visit Britain, is predicated on the numbers of tourists that they attract to the destination. And what I'd like to kind of get us to think about is the idea that we cannot constantly have key measures of success for these important public agencies, which are basically predicated on developing more and more in an unsustainable fashion. That might be not something which political paymasters want to hear, but as an academic, I've got the luxury of them not paying my salary, and I've got perhaps the luxury of being able to maybe make some kind of controversial comments from time to time. One of the things I'd perhaps like to think about is when you read what tourism organisations are trying to do around the world, one of the things that they all try to say is, we want to be different. Come to Wales because Wales is different from England. Come to Trinidad and Tobago because it's different from other neighbouring countries. The paradox and the irony between what destination management organisations and politicians set out to do is to create a sense of differentiation. But actually, if you look around the world, what you might see is that more and more places are looking the same. So we have a kind of irony between what people are setting out to do in their strategies and what reality they're creating. And some academics have argued that we're all engaged in a kind of zero-sum game where we're all hosting mega events, we're all hosting Formula One, we're all trying to have a Guggenheim museum, we're all having five-star hotels, so we're all trying to do the same kind of product development, but actually that's creating a cycle of an unsustainable tourism industry, and also a cycle whereby places are becoming more and more alike in a race to look more and more different. Every place has got some kind of reputation. Now, unfortunately, I've never been to Trinidad and Tobago. I would love to go. But I have a mental picture of what Trinidad and Tobago might be like. Now, listening to the previous speaker, very eloquently talking about the digital world, lots of those perceptions are formed in the digital environment. But lots of those perceptions are also formed at the other end of things like this, by the global media. The global media actually is probably the single most important driver of creating images and perceptions, whether they're based around tourism or whether they're based around culture, of places and peoples around the world. And one of the things that I write about very much as an academic is how places can try to influence and change for the better their destination or their place reputation. And that is a very severe challenge, particularly for small countries that have a very small share of voice and a very small share of influence in the global stage. You can talk about reputation in a very academic way, in a marketing sense, but I think it's actually quite simple. And one of the most powerful ways I think about reputation is what people say about you or your place when you're not in the room. Your reputation is what other people say about you. So you can shout very loudly, Wales is a great place, Trinidad and Tobago is a great place, America is a great place. But it's not what you say, it's what other people say about your place, your culture and your destination that's critically important. And we all evaluate reputations. Might go home now and tonight and say, I listened to that Nigel Morgan, he was a complete waste of half an hour of my life. Or you might go away and might think, well, I said one or two interesting things. If I just said one interesting thing, that would be positive, wouldn't it? Reputation is based around communication. We all talk about places and peoples and cultures. So really, what we're doing is storytelling. And I think that's a critical kind of message in how place reputations are created, whether that's digitally, as we've just heard, or whether that's actually in kind of physical spaces. We also evaluate and we appraise different places. So is somewhere better than somewhere else? Is somebody on some dimension better than somewhere else? And it's also about being distinctive, going back to my ducks all lined up. How do we convince other key opinion formers around the world that we have something distinctive to offer as a place? What does, where I'm from, Wales, have to offer that makes it distinctive in a kind of tourism realm, or as a place maybe for inward investment, or as somewhere that's actually quite nice to live? Cardiff was recently voted by TripAdvisor as having the best quality of life in the UK, which I thought was quite nice, being as I live there. But probably not something that a lot of people maybe would relate to who don't know Cardiff in detail. You might have a perception of Cardiff that's quite different. It might be based around sport, because it's quite well known for sport. Or if you're of a certain age, it might be based around more negative ideas around industrialization. But all of those kind of images of Cardiff are formed through things like the media, not necessarily what Cardiff says about itself. Now, place reputation management is very much in vogue at the moment, and there are lots of agencies that are set up to try to influence a range of stakeholders, whether that's attracting students. We've heard from the University of Oxford delegation already that students are actually very important to places. They don't just bring in hard cash and hard currency, but one of the things that I quite often talk about when I'm sitting in government is actually students become very strong advocates for your place. Now, Cardiff is home to 70,000. It's not in the League of Oxford, but it's got 70,000 students in 4 different institutions. If they get a positive experience, both of their university and of the place, they become very powerful advocates for that place, that culture, when they return home. And lots of those students are increasingly overseas students. So I think that education, I mean, I would say this because it's my living, but I think education is a powerful agent for cultural understanding and for cultural diplomacy. Of course, despite the fact that all these agencies exist out there to try to promote their places, reputation is actually created by people like you folks and by those students that I've just talked about. It's not actually created by the marketing organisations. Reputation is about, as I've said, what other people say about you. It's actually not about marketing. Although when you stand up and talk about how you create reputations, people tend to think it's all about place marketing, it's about spending a lot of money on creating logos, creating and maintaining embassies, offices around the world. It's actually not just about putting money into an organisation, although of course money's important. It's actually about creating a powerful sense of place and about creating a powerful experience for people. And that's becoming more and more challenging in a very, very globalized, competitive world. We've already heard about how social media is totally transforming every human relationship. One of the things that I do in my day job is teach digital marketing, actually. And one of the kind of facts that I quite often throw out to get people's attention is, I don't know if you've heard about this idea that we're all separated by a certain number of degrees of separation. It's quite often talked about as being 7 degrees of separation. Well, I read recently that social media and the internet is bringing that down, and it's now close to 3 degrees of separation. So if one of you folks wants to talk to somebody in Wales about something, now you know me, you could send me an email, and I might email one of my friends who might know somebody in the area, who might then know somebody else. It's a lot easier to do that now with social media and with email and with the internet than it's been ever before in human history. But it's very difficult in a globalized world to maintain relevance. And one of the things that I often talk about when I'm asked to go and talk to destination management organizations, whether they're local governments, whether they're national or city governments, is you need to think very carefully before you get into tourism if you're not already a mature destination. People see tourism as being some kind of panacea. It'll bring in hard foreign exchange. It will help transform people's lives. It will promote cultural understanding. Yes, it can do all of those things. But you have to think very carefully about what kind of tourism industry you want to develop in your country. Because tourism can also bring lots of negative things. Maybe you might think about a rise in crime rates. It might bring unwelcome cultural exchanges. It might bring tensions between tourists and locals. I would suggest if tourism doesn't actually benefit the local communities in an area or a destination, there's no point. There's absolutely no point in developing tourism that all it does is suck out things from the local economy and the local place and distribute that wealth back to global multinationals. So you have to think very carefully about what kind of tourism industry you want to develop. And I would suggest that it might sound very obvious. It might sound very common sense. But people don't actually think too carefully about what kind of tourism industry they want. They see tourism as being a shortcut to all kinds of development. So you need to recognize that tourism brings positive and negative things. You also very carefully need to plan for success in tourism. I was saying earlier that I was in Kurdistan last year, before what's recently happening with ISIS. And Kurdistan was looking to develop tourism to diversify the economy away from oil. And lots of countries are doing this kind of diversification. And I asked them, well, what kind of people, what kind of markets do you want to attract? And they said, everybody. We want everybody to come to Kurdistan. I would suggest that's not a very sensible policy. You want to think about very carefully what kind of tourism you want. Do you want to develop casino tourism? Do you want to develop family tourism? What kind of tourism product do you want to develop? because some of those aspects of that kind of tourism might be seen as being unethical or immoral or not actually beneficial to the area for one reason or another. You also need to understand where you're going if you want to develop tourism. And this doesn't matter whether you're a mature destination like the UK or a developing destination that's actually coming into tourism for the first time. You need to think very carefully about what you want out of the industry, who do you want to partner with, what kind of image you want to create on the world stage. Because tourism is a very critical lever for developing place reputations. One of the things that I quite often talk about is when you sit around tables, and I was doing this last week, and we were talking about creating a new investment strategy and a new marketing and digital platform to attract business people to invest in places like Wales and places around Wales, is that actually lots of research points to the fact that when you're trying to target business people, you shouldn't make an overly rational appeal. Because every single place around the world is going to say we've got great talent. Everywhere's going to say we've got great infrastructure, we've got great digital platforms. What people are actually interested in is it a nice place to live? Is it somewhere where you've got great cultural scene? Is it somewhere that will attract a diverse workforce? And this is where places like Seattle have done really well. They've actually created the right environment to bring in talented people from across the world, but also not just creating a kind of invitation through a very hard rational appeal, but also by creating the same kind of facilities that tourists value, that residents value, and that business people who are looking to set up new operations also value. You also need to think about valuing authenticity. Well, what does that mean? Well, one of the things that places often do is look for what's new, build new facilities, build skyscrapers, build new event stadia. All of that, yes, is important, and all of that attracts tourism and attracts talent and attracts money and investment and all the things that places are trying to do. But actually, it also has a byproduct sometimes of undermining the authenticity of a place. Do you go to Singapore to look at all the skyscrapers? Not sure. Possibly. Do you go to, I don't know, do you go to London to look at all the skyscrapers? Maybe you go to Chicago because they kind of invented them. But when you come to London, you come for the culture. You come for Big Ben, Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, National Museums, blah, blah, blah. So you have to be very careful in how you manage new infrastructural development without actually tearing down what people value. And you could argue, if I'm being a little bit kind of controversial, you could argue that in Beijing, for the Olympic Games, they got that balance wrong. Because a lot of people are saying, well, where is the original and authentic Beijing now? Because so many new developments have occurred. The other thing that I would suggest, and now lots of places around the world are going for a kind of race to the bottom in tourism terms. Let's get more and more people in because that equals success. That's not a very sustainable approach. Probably you're much better off going for a very kind of specific niche product where you deliver the quality that people are now expecting. People are expecting when they check in to have free Wi-Fi. It's actually quite annoying when you have to pay for it these days, but you do in lots of places. But business people and leisure travelers now are looking for all these basic things like infrastructure in terms of Wi-Fi, in terms of good service. And this is why you need to think very carefully about how you're going to fund your tourism industry. Whose money are you going to take? Because once you start thinking about partnering with multinational companies, multinational corporations, what kind of tourism do they want? Is that the kind of tourism you want for your country?